So now we have here our salivary glands, right? So salivary glands' main function is what? When most people think. It's the secretion of saliva, right? Saliva, spit, okay? So saliva's main function is, when people think about it, is lubrication, but it has also several other main functions that really need to be understood, all right? So first things first is that we have three different types of salivary glands. We have the parotid, located below the ear. So parotid. We have the submandibular, so it's below the mandible. And then finally we have the sublingual. Okay, so these are the three different types of salivary glands, right? So the way they are activated. So they are activated by those cranial nerves that you learned before, right? So the parotid is regulated by cranial nerve, which is called the glossopharyngeal nerve. So the glossopharyngeal nerve. So do you remember which cranial nerve that is? That is number 9. All right. And then the submandibular and sublingual is regulated or controlled by the cranial nerve 7. So cranial nerve number 7, this is called the facial nerve. Facial nerve, right? And so the salivary glands are regulated by the autonomic nervous system. So if you remember, autonomic nervous system, you have branches off into two specific subsections. The parasympathetic, which is the flight or fight, and then you have the sympathetic, which is the rest and digest. So during a parasympathetic response, right, so this is during digestion, your body innervates, your autonomic nervous system innervates the salivary glands in order to secrete more saliva. So increase lubrication, because you know you're eating, right? So you're eating, so you need more saliva in order to be able to swallow, so or degluttonate, right? And then on the other hand, on the sympathetic nervous system, so you're in a fight or flight, you're running, right? So you're running away from everything. You have a tendency of secreting far less salivary gland intervention, which leads to less saliva secretion, right? So parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system use these specific nerves to regulate the secretion of saliva, okay? So two nerves that are really important, right? So this is all in the oral cavity. This is taking the oral cavity, right? So two specific enzymes that I want you to really focus on is salivary amylases, and salivary lipases, right? So I kept saying digestion doesn't begin in the stomach, right? Again, big misconception. Digestion actually begins in the oral cavity, specifically with these two enzymes that are secreted from these salivary glands. Salivary amylases' main function is to break down a carbohydrate, specifically the starches. Salivary lipases, so what do you think a lipase does? So every time you see the word ACE, when you think ACE, majority of the time it means to kill, right? So most enzymes have this ACE region because they're trying to break down certain materials. So amylases break down the starches, whereas the lipases break down the lipids and the fats. And so when all of this is combined, you have the saliva secreted from the salivary glands, and you have all these amylases secreted from the amylase, and then you have the food. So remember the taco I was talking about, and it's condensed into this little structure, this very lubricated structure, that is called the bolus. So that is called the bolus. Let's do it here. And now the bolus goes down the pharynx, through the esophagus, eventually reaching the stomach.